co-hosting this discussion, this panel on Black British feminism with the journal Feminist Review, and to be marking the introduction of a new special issue. It's a great thing to be doing. I'd like to thank Yasmin Gunaratnam, who's done a lot of the organisational work in setting this up. I'd also like to acknowledge that this is actually the second of two events we've had at Goldsmiths on Black British feminism. There can never be enough events on Black British feminism. And I think of the work of what we're doing as being about creating these spaces where we can repopulate the university with our own bodies. I'm very grateful to be at Goldsmiths with a number of colleagues who are very committed to Black British feminism, and I just want to thank a few of them just quickly. So Joan Anem Adu, Nirmal Pawar, Yasmin Gunaratnam, Claudia Bernard, and Heidi Mirza. And I'd just also like to add a personal thanks to Heidi. It was when Heidi did the edited collection Black British Feminism in 1996. She invited me to be part of that collection, and it was a life-changing moment. Her generosity enabled me to feel part of not only a collection, but also a collective. So thanks for that, Heidi. So I'm now very... I'm now very happy to pass over to our chair tonight, Suzanne Scafe. Thank you.
Well, welcome everybody. Thanks very much, Sarah, for introducing it, and thanks too for your hard work in crossing what seemed to me from the outside to be lots and lots of T's, dotting lots of I's to make the event what it is. So thanks everybody for coming, and I hope that I'm sure it's going to be a fantastic evening. So welcome to everyone. This event is the launch of issue 108, Black British Feminisms, and the event doubles as the Feminist Review annual lecture. In choosing the title of the event, we self-consciously invoke what was probably the first expression of Black British feminism in an academic publication, issue 17 of Feminist Review 1984, entitled Many Voices, One Chance. As is the way of contemporary academic production, the route for this issue we're launching tonight was more clearly mapped, even as the intention was always, and I'm quoting Joan and Zoe here, to do things differently. Joan first presented me with the idea for this issue one evening in August 2011, and her original concept was developed through workshops, or what we might call Black feminist groundings, quote unquote, here at Goldsmiths, and the following year at a weekend retreat. The aim was always to produce an issue that spoke in some way, and how could it not, to the 1984 issue, while not, and I think we're all clear about this, producing a teleological narrative that would link representations of Black British feminism in 1984 then, as it were, to its articulation in 2014 now. Rather, the intention of this issue is to create a theoretical, ideological, but also a creative and lyrical sounding of Black British feminism, one that, as always, emphasises the robust, critical openness of feminist practice and feminist academic discourse. As Angela Davis recently reminded us here at Goldsmiths, just the other day, the importance of feminism is not just that it has at its centre intersectionality, nor that its focus is patriarchy and patriarchal institutions, but that it always and vigilantly works to expose and to critique the ways in which institutions of the state configure the personal and the intimate. Feminism is also, and importantly, about exposing the heteronormative structures that underpin the networks of dominance that categorise and regulate identities. Black feminists, who are often those experiencing most sharply the sharpest edges of the state, have always known this. As Black feminist activists and academics, we have prioritised and continue, as the contributions to this issue show, to lead on transformative alliances that tackle those interlocking systems of subordination. Those alliances have always been composed of common interests among activists activists, organisers and academics among sexual minorities and racialised minorities, as well as queer scholars and race scholars. While not wanting to fetishise the past, the issue does include a backward glance, but one that is always mindful of the important role that social media and new technologies play in reconceptualising the past, as well as making possible effective ways of organising, of strengthening those interlocking interests. Our contributors welcome the potential created by new technologies for global solidarities or ever more sophisticated and interconnected forms of resistance. Our panellists tonight, who are going to be here, reflect those common interests and alliances that might represent the many chants of Black British feminism. But before we hear from the panellists, I just want to quickly mention the work of one or two contributors not represented on the panel. Firstly, Anita Sundari. In this issue, Anita and Ruth Pearson reflect on the events of the 30th anniversary of the Grunwick strikes in 1976 and 1978, connecting those well-known expressions of South Asian women's militancy and their marginalisation and betrayal by the trade union movement with the less well-remembered 2005 Gate Gourmet dispute with its uncanny echoes of earlier struggles. In her article, Sukhwant Dhaliwal reminds us that 2014 marks 25 years since the formation of Women Against Fundamentalism, an organisation that again was structured by a constellation of activists and organisations committed to defending and strengthening secular public institutions and combating fundamentalism. And although Women Against Fundamentalism folded this year, its concerns, unfortunately, seem ever more urgent, and its absence acutely felt. Urgent and contemporary too are the articles by Aisha Phoenix and Sidra Foster that address in different ways the materiality of blackness, often articulated in terms of sufficiency. The body is insufficiently inscribed and authenticated or excessively marked and in need of toning down. And finally, in an interview with Yasmin Gunaratnam, Heidi Merzer describes her own journeys into and within the fraught and often conflicted spaces that constitute Black British feminism. I recognise in her brief introductory remarks in that article the labour, the struggle, the actual conflict that characterised our early Black feminist activism. The problematic, even painful, to use Heidi's word, but necessary alliances with campaigns for legal justice, for community reparation and protection and international solidarity. These were often led and sustained by Black feminist groups organising in the late 1970s and 1980s. The scars left by some of that bridge building took some time to heal. However, to close, in the spirit of optimism and animation that characterises all our submissions, I'll properly begin our event with Heidi's closing comments in her interview. She says, quote, "For me, Black feminism is a stalwart tree with rich, deep roots, lovingly nurtured by a community of careful, critical gardeners. The wise embrace of its strong branches reaches out across time and space to shelter a multitude of different voices. It is why, after more than 30 years, it is still the branch on which I sit." End quote. And on that note, or from that branch, Heidi, I'd like to welcome first Dorothea. Dorothea Smartt, who's going to open with a reading. We're going straight from Dorothea's reading to Professor Anne Phoenix, our keynote speaker. So I'll just do the introductory biographies, if that's okay together. Dorothea. Dorothea Smartt is an internationally known, as in just having flown in from Barbados this morning, Black feminist poet and literary activist who has published 2 collections of poetry with People Tree Press, Connecting Mediums and Shipshape. Her latest chapbook is the wonderful and wonderfully entitled Reader, I Married Him, and Other Queer Goings-On. After Dorothea's reading, we'll move straight to our keynote speaker, Professor Anne Phoenix. Anne just asked me to read one sentence of her biography, and I'll elaborate a little bit. Anne is a professor of psychosocial research at the Thomas Coram Research Institute, UCL, University of Education. Her research is mainly about social identities and the ways in which psychological experiences and social processes are linked. It focuses on racialized and gendered identities and experiences, mixed parentage, masculinity, consumption, young people and their parents, and the transition to motherhood. So welcome, Dorothea.
Hi everybody, I'm really pleased to be here, and I was very committed to being here, considering I got off a flight from Barbados this morning and came home to no heating and no hot water. So I've been like holed up in my living room, huddled around the one little heater that I've got. I'm going to read the poem that I have. I contributed to, and I very much wanted to pay respects to someone who was around when I was involved in the issue. Many voices, one chant. We did our best. And that was Maud Salter. And Maud Salter was a visual artist, photographer, publisher, curator, gallery owner, quite a few things, quite a dynamic young woman. I was too scared to be all those things when I was in my kind of 20s and 30s, but she was really had, what's that word, chutzpah, yeah. And unfortunately she passed away about kind of 8 years ago now, and she is not to be forgotten. And this poem is based on a sequence of, she did a lot of self-portraiture, and this poem was inspired by these series of images of herself, kind of head and shoulder shots. Okay, and the title is All Those Attempts in the Changing Room, looking at Maud Salter's Les Bijoux 1 to 9, detail. And there's a little quote at the beginning from a poem by Anne Stevenson, which says, "Look for me, where I learned to look for myself. Who could know then what I'd be in years to come, or what eventually did or must happen?" 1. In the light of the camera's flash, in her eyes that you cannot escape, a flicker of her soul, like sunlight on sweet water, you'd like to think. Her photos bear witness, a love affair with the erased. Her skin prefers plays, highlights in her portraits chiaroscuro, where you imagine a forever youthful me. One instance, reprinted, replayed with innocence, swathed with swagger, robed in black velvet, tugging fresh water pearls, clutching her neck. She foregrounds her flirtations, confrontation in those eyes. 2. Surrounding herself with the dark, her smooth skin, bared shoulders, Jean Duval put into play, like some dangerous Oshun, Ibu Koli, vulture feathers play at her breasts. See that sneer on her lips? That's anger, spurring ambition, with diamonds and black plumage making her best plays to the camera, plays for us, giving Jean room to maneuver. like they come back, belle d'abandon, plays her out of the dark, here to claim her rights, so alive but dead to the world. Every morning delivered this face, she lets go, for Jean to inhabit. She appears, temptress, actor, avenger, curator, bitch, publisher, muse, artist, intellectual, poet, they refuse to see. Play her false, play her down at their peril. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm delighted to be here. It's a real honour to have been asked to do a talk at this celebratory event and to think about the issues that arise through considering the history of this celebration. What I was asked to do was to think about the historical context in which this special issue, 108, could be written, which starts with Feminist Review, issue 17, which is now iconic. In fact, it's so iconic that I don't have a copy. It went out of print a long time ago, and it was one of those issues that people continually borrowed. So most people in the room don't look as if they were people who could possibly have borrowed my copy. But if anybody knows who did, I still wouldn't mind getting it back after all this time. Since not exactly all the pages are available online, and certainly not the cover, which is one reason that I've put up this description at the bottom here, which Feminist Review printed, a celebration of Feminist Review issue 17, and it describes the flamboyant pink four-handed goddesses dancing across the green and black cover, and how it was one of the first attempts to provide a collection of perspectives from African, Caribbean and South Asian feminists in Britain. It was really important. And I also very much liked the title, Many Voices, One Chant. And I liked the fact that it was black feminist perspectives. Why did I like that? Because at the time, it was very, very common to be invited either to write something or to give a talk where, and it was quite common for people to say, well, you know, there are these perspectives, socialist feminist, liberal feminist, and so on, and black feminist. So all black feminists were expected to be within one perspective. So the fact that in 1984, in this issue, the title had perspectives was very important, even though saying one chant, attempting to make certain claims, it recognised the plurality. And that's a point I'll come on to in a moment. But another reason that I'm delighted to be here, to be doing this, that I think it's so important, is that Feminist Review, I'm very proud of and very pleased about. And that's because it's, for more than 30 years now, engaged in struggle and contestation over what it is to be racialized, over innovation in thinking about racisms, over black British feminisms, and engagement with difficult ideas and moving on with them and thinking afresh. And it's done that partly because it's not been stuck with individual members. You know, there are groups of us who were on the collective who are not now. So it's moved on and so transcended individual members, but carried on the project that is so important. And I think that you can see in the special issues, in the collective, and in some of the papers, some of which I'll mention, that it's done that over the years, which is not to say that it's been perfect, or that it was always easy to be a member of the collective. You know, but you know, that's an important story in itself. I'm proud of what Feminist Review has achieved over these 30 years. And I want now to mention briefly, which might seem rather odd, something that came before that special issue in the pages of Feminist Review. There's a paper by Floya Anthias and Nira Yuval Davis called Contextualizing Feminism, Gender, Ethnic and Class Divisions, and it was a paper for which they were much reviled. You know, most people hated it. They were one of the things that they were arguing about was that rather than focusing on race and blackness, that they, as minoritized ethnic women, and from the work that they were doing and so on, thought that we ought to have a focus on ethnicity. It was not the space and place to see it. They were much reviled for that article. It's now one of the most read articles in the journal of all time. And thinking has changed. And I want to highlight that, partly because it came a year before Many Voices, One Chant, but also because our stories change. I'm very interested in narratives, and the story that I'm going to tell you is partial. It's my story from now, which historicizes and draws on these issues. But one can't see always how things will shift, how things will change, which things will become acceptable, which things will be reviled later. So it's not a story for once and for all, but mine's a story for today, and theirs demonstrates that it's a shifting story. Okay, so what I want to do in this talk is to think about, since I'm thinking about history in a partial way, the conditions of possibility for the celebration that we're having tonight of issue 108. And I think when people speak about that issue on the round table, you'll see that there's a lot to be celebrated in terms of the thinking. And I want also to think about some current contestations. The point of doing that is to make one argument that I think is so important, that there always were contestations, heated debates, hate sometimes, around issues of putting blackness, putting racialization on the feminist agenda, and those have not gone away. They've shifted and changed. But things are recursive and they're new, and we need to think about an analysis of how that happens, what that means. Okay, so if we're to think about the history, we can't start with Feminist Review, issue 17 in 1984. It didn't come out of a blue sky. It took a lot of work and thinking to produce. And long before then, there are things that many of you will know as iconic that had already been thought about or published or said. And obviously, Sojourner Truth is often mentioned with her "and ain't I a woman" refrain as somebody who really argued for the intersections of gender, racialization, class, enslavement, or freedom in 1851. And then the Combahee River Collective, also in the United States, in 1977, published a statement that, and this is freely available on the web and republished in many, many places, which did intersectionality, and remember that this is before Kimberlé Crenshaw had coined the term in 1989, and certainly talked about what we would call racialization and class and sexuality, and foregrounding all of those simultaneously with the impact that therefore we had shifting allegiances and alliances to make. And just to, I've put up a bit of what they said. They said, although we are feminists and lesbians, we feel solidarity with black men. Our situation as black people necessitates that we have solidarity around the fact of race, which white women, of course, do not need to have with white men. We struggle together with black men against racism, while we also struggle with black men about sexism. Okay, and we're actively committed to struggling against racial, sexual, heterosexual, and class oppression, and so on. Okay, but this sentence here, practice based upon the fact that the major systems of oppression are interlocking, and that's terribly important, and many of you will know very well that statement. And then to move on, and I said it was partial, so I'm obviously not going to give you every little paper, every thing that was published or said in between, but there are important currents that I want to pick out. And certainly, one of them is Southall Black Sisters. Okay? That's started in 1979, continuing still, and doing a lot of campaigning work legally and to do with immigration and so on, but really also helping us think through what it means to be black, to be South Asian, and so on. Okay, so a really important group that continues still. And they were also partly in Women Against Fundamentalism, so they've had an impact there. But then OWAD, and if you look at the picture there, which is a poster from OWAD, you'll see that it says Organisation of Women of Scrubbed Out Asian and African Descent. And that's terribly important, because when OWAD started in 1978, for the first few months, it was the Organisation of Women of Africa and African Descent. And you can see that the women who are there look as if they are black African descent. But very soon after that, it changed its name to the Organisation of Women of Asian and African Descent. And the reason for that was because it became quite clear that in Britain, unlike in the United States, we were contesting what blackness meant. And for, I think, a very lovely period, many of us, certainly by no means all, agreed on an inclusive definition of blackness that included in Asia, included in many different people. And there were debates. Are the Irish black? Are Jewish people black? And the reason being, of course, that blackness was not about skin shade, but about differential racisms and what happened to people. It's a really important period of my life, I think. And obviously it's changed, and we could go into why that is, but I'm not going to, because of time at the moment. So that was really important. Having said that, of course, it immediately became a line of fissure. It became something fractious as well, because there are people who felt that one or the other African or Asian groups weren't getting enough of their issues addressed. Okay, so it also became a source of fragmentation. But what OWAD did, apart from publishing the newsletter, which was so important because it's something that people could read, even if they weren't in London or where sort of people mostly met. But what OWAD did was to link women's struggles in Africa, Asia, and in the diaspora, and to theorize those in terms of colonial histories, to historicize them. They had as well 4 national conferences that had hundreds of women going to them in London. And in consequence, they generated a lot of local black women's organisations. And I've put up here Abyssindi because I lived in Manchester at that time. And that was very important, both because it was somewhere where black women could meet, think about what was happening with black women, theoretically, do things in practice, campaign, but also have cultural issues dealt with. And it also did hair. Which no small thing on a Saturday morning. Okay, and that was really important. But there were also within OWAD, within any of the organisations that started around the country, heated contestations. It wasn't easy. So it wasn't only that black women were contesting with white women around feminism and what that meant, what black women meant, but that we were also contesting with each other. The lesbian women in OWAD didn't necessarily have a brilliant time, and they had to fight around issues of homophobia and how it played itself out. There was also, as I've said before, that fissure, that fracture between black African and black Asian women, given that it was about black feminism at the time, and the boundaries of blackness therefore came to be writ large. But one of the things that became absolutely clear is that there was a recognition that we couldn't be entirely essentialist, that there was insider heterogeneity and difference, whether we liked it or not, whether we thought that that would cause problems of fragmentation. And from that, I want to pick up a couple of other articles that have been key signifiers for understanding black feminisms. From the States, Chandra Talpady Mohanty's Under Western Skies, published in Feminist Review as well. And what she was arguing is that Western feminisms have tended to reproduce categories that are problematic, categories through which the West constructs and represents itself as better than everybody else. Okay? So that, third world feminists have had all the time, she argues, to deconstruct what it is that feminists in the West do in terms of their theorizing. And then Hazel Carby, this is published in the Birmingham Centre for Contemporary Cultural Studies, The Empire Strikes Back, her article, White Woman Listen. And she talked about racism being as much about how you're included as being excluded, because that matters too. So simply being included in a category, or included in meetings, or included in a journal collective didn't mean that everything was therefore automatically all right. The manner of inclusion mattered a great deal. And she certainly critiqued Eurocentric approaches to concepts that are crucial to feminism, patriarchy, the family, reproduction, and so on. So what comes from that, and Avtar Bra in an encyclopedia entry, I think sort of really theorizes and thinks about this period of history in very interesting ways. And one of the things that she points out is, of course, that things like OWAD and what women were writing and doing in that period, black women were writing and doing, really showed the complexity of theorizing women's subordination. And one of the points that she makes that is really important, and I think is key, because it's an issue that I think has come back now, is that what OWAD and its theorizing did, for example, as well as other work that we'll come on to, was to disrupt the notion that writing by black women or women of colour is personal testimony or advocacy, but never theory. That we can do the personal, and our hearts are frequently on our sleeves anyway, so of course we can, but it's not theory, it's not properly theoretical, and which is really ironic, given that one of the slogans of the time was "the personal is political." Deconstructed now, but nonetheless, some people's personal is less theoretical than others. Okay, and what I think is really important about that is that, as Avtar says, the analysis of experiences based on intersections of diverse forms of injustice was something that became clear through the work of OWAD, through the publications I've just mentioned and so on. And it's quite clear to me that we have to take a psychosocial view of those publications, of what leads to publications like that, because they have both psychic and material effects. And Gayatri Chakravorty-Spivak talks about the way in which constructions of people, certain categorizations, produce epistemic violence. And I think that that's really important. How black women are seen, their exclusion from theorization within what some people call white feminism is epistemically violent. It has emotional impact. And even if that's not felt, it has impact on, and I think we see that in some of the articles in issue 108, and perhaps we'll come back to that in discussing. And as Julia Sudbury says, OWAD is often constructed as a golden era, something that's gone. One of the things that I hope that we'll all take away from tonight is that with issue 108, it's clearly not a golden age. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a narrative that looks back and says, oh, that was fantastic, that was lovely. As long as we also recognise that things are happening in the current, and that some of the fantastic, lovely was hard, painful, unpleasant, frightening, and so on, and that one didn't want to do it. Okay? Okay. So here is Feminist Review 17. And these are some of the contents. I'm sorry, I couldn't put all of them on the page here. But you can see that there's things there about imperial feminism. There are things about the economic crisis in the British state. And you can see some of these are free to pick up from the web. Asian women, as well in the making of history. Poetry. Black lesbian discussions. All of those things are there. And I think that the other thing that's important to notice is that many of the women are still around and still active. And I think that's important because quite often people talk about intergenerational differences, and I'll come on to that at the end of this talk, in ways that I think are problematic. Dorothy, you wanted a photo of that? I'll give it to you later. Okay. And again, as Avtar Bra says, that work by, in that era, the Feminist Review special issue, prefigured later theories of difference, and that's important. So not only did it not come from nowhere, but it also prefigured what happens later. And what I like about what Avtar says about it is that it's an intellectual intervention through the work of collective thinking. Okay? And I think that that's really important. That's what we still need, collective thinking, collective challenge and collaboration as well. And she picks out some other points in that encyclopedia article, that Feminist Review 17 was about capitalist colonial relations that were central to metropolitan society, that there are commonalities in the injustices that women face around the world around racialization, ethnicization, but there are also commonalities with the white working class. So it's not just a black-white issue at all, and that was made clear in Feminist Review 17. There are commonalities and differences that are complex and shifting, and that the intersections of racism and gender produce specific power relations that we need to think about, but that also heterosexism, homophobia, Eurocentricity, and racism all have to be addressed as part of a feminist theoretical and political practice, and that that's important. I want also then to briefly think about an article that was published the next year in response by two members of the Feminist Review Collective. And at the time, the Feminist Review Collective were all white. But Michelle Barrett and Mary McIntosh published an article called Ethnocentrism and Socialist Feminist Theory. And one of the things that they were attempting to do was to say, you won't be able to read this, so it's not my intention that you should be, and it's not that I want to stop you from reading it, but just that I didn't think you could read it from that distance. But that, really, let's think about what this means, and that, we've sometimes avoided these contestations because they're difficult, but what does it mean to listen? And they were in turn roundly criticised, critiqued. I mean, there's an issue that has several articles critiquing this article in Feminist Review, and they got a lot of contestation. But they were also doing, and I think quite rightly, but they were also doing something very brave, and that I think that it's worth doing, which is to address head-on, to put yourself in print, to say something, to take seriously other people's engagement. And in doing so, I think that they also produced new ways of conceptualizing difference and identity, and really contributed to putting difference on the feminist agenda. And what has become commonplace since then is, of course, a foregrounding of difference. There are many things that we can take for granted now about difference that were not taken for granted in the 1980s, for example. And one of the reasons that we can is that black women in their writing, in the special issue, in OWAD and so on, helped to reformulate feminist theory, and that came to permeate the academy. And I'm not a fantasist, although I'm telling a partial narrative. I'm not suggesting that everywhere you turn in the academy, people are saying, oh, black feminism would say this. It's not the code. But it nonetheless has permeated the academy in all sorts of ways. The acceptance that difference has to be theorised in some way. And now, racism, diaspora, post-colonial studies, transnational identities, globalisation appear at different parts of academic study in different ways. I mean, there's no university, I would argue, that doesn't have some of this on the agenda at some time. And certainly, Antheas and Yuval Davis's insistence on the importance of ethnicity has also joined those debates being important. Okay? And I think really important, and again, Avtar Bra's book, which you'll see in a moment, but also a lot of the things that have been said didn't polarize black feminisms and white feminisms. And funnily enough, black feminists were often treated as if they were doing that polarization, but they were not necessarily. I mean, obviously some were, some still would, some white women still would do a polarization, but it was more complicated than that. Okay? So not saying that they were mutually exclusive and not treating them as trans-historical, certainly not. And here, thinking about Yasmin Gunaratnam's book, one of the areas in which I went into as well, and important for me, is thinking about power relations of racialization and ethnicity in research, because that's been something that I've always been really concerned with, and thinking about it as something that's not a specialist concern, as many people think. I remember once, when I was an early career researcher, somebody saying to me, well, you know, your research is advocacy, it's not proper research. But yet, and that was because it always included in black young people and or black mothers. Whereas all those studies on white mothers or, you know, only white young people were not advocacy and not exclusive. It was just proper academic work. And I think that's worth remembering, that some people still hold those sorts of views. So Yasmin's book, it's not specialist concerns. And all of this ferment around thinking about black feminisms led to a lot of different books. I mean, this is just a small number of them from the States, the United States of America, and from Britain. And you can see there's Bell Hooks, who published Ain't I a Woman in 1981, but actually wrote it 10 years earlier when she was 19, and published it much later. But still, the thing that I think is the very best title in this area. All the women are white, all the blacks are men, but some of us are brave. And I've always liked that. I mean, it ranks with a psychology text that I love as a psychologist myself, which is Even the Rat Was White. I think that it's really good. Okay, and you can see there the importance of Heart of the Race for us in Britain, which I, along with many other people, read and read again, simply because it was so important. Charting the Journey, really crucially important as well, an edited collection. And Heidi Mertzer's Black British Feminism edited collection, also important there. Julia Sudbury's, you'll see again in a moment, and particularly Bill Collins in the State, Black Feminist Thought. And I can see the time is galloping, so I'm going to move on. One of the things that came out of this sort of work was not the coining of the phrase intersectionality, because Kimberlé Crenshaw came to it rather differently. She came to it from her juridical law academic practice. But one of the reasons that it became popular was because the coining of the term fitted with all the things that I've been showing you already. So it really suited what we were already thinking about. It's a way of conceptualizing difference and identity, and thinking about how the structural, social practices, institutional arrangements, cultural discourses all come together in complex and contradictory ways. And also, I think, for me, a crucial point is that intersectionality is one way of including in everybody. It's not exclusionary, although people sometimes treat it as if black women are excluding other people, or are somehow bludgeoning other people by using the term intersectionality. But it is actually a way of theorizing everybody all together relationally and thinking about power relations in complex ways. This is just a quote that I like from Margaret Anderson in Race, Class and Gender, Common Bonds. And talking about Cornel West, who says race matters. And they say, race matters, writes the African-American philosopher Cornel West, actually class, gender and race matter. And they matter because they structure interactions, opportunities, consciousness, and so on. And I'll move on rather than reading more of that. Okay, and this is something that was very important I didn't say that following on from the debate in Feminist Review, that Gail Lewis, Aftar Bra and myself joined the Feminist Review collective, around that period. Another thing that we thought was important to do was to set up a series on gender, racism and ethnicity. And we have at least 2 authors in the audience tonight. It ran for 10 years. These are some of the books that we published that you can see here. And if we thought that it was a fight in Feminist Review, in outside, at work and so on, we hadn't yet encountered the publishers, but we did. And when we stopped doing this in 2000, we'd had 4 editors, and we'd had shifts and changes in what Routledge thought was acceptable or not. We'd had all sorts of things rejected by them that we thought were cutting edge and crucially important, including something by Angela Davis. The editor then said, when we said, but she is really well known, it's bound to sell. They said, yes, but she's well known for the wrong reasons, for bad things. It's very hard to get a grasp on the histories that have led into certain ways of thinking and so on, for people to do it themselves and for it to all to be brought together. So it's not surprising that there's a recursiveness of competing claims about the importance of racism, racialization, ethnicization, and so on. And just to give you some examples, you don't have to read this. Some of you will have read it already, some of you know it, but I just like it. I mean, I don't really like it, but I just think that it's very indicative, which is Julie Burchill in The Spectator, Don't You Dare to Tell Me to Check My Privilege, which is great. But then some critique of that, Hadley Freeman, who I think does a good piece, check your privilege, whatever that means, and takes it sort of rather more seriously. And then a Mus blog, which here is by Anita Little, and goes through thinking about those issues and about being a black woman and what that means. And I think this picture that she's put there is really, it speaks volumes in its own way, but I'm not going to discuss it now, in that I need to stop. Just to say, the point that I'm making is that some of the contestation, and there are many things like this at the moment, many, and they proliferate because it's so easy for them to proliferate on the web, which is people saying, all these black women telling us about our privilege, telling us about intersectionality. How dare they? And what I want to argue is that that's actually not that different from the sorts of things that we face, but in different guise. And in changed circumstances, it's different to fight it. Okay, so I'm not suggesting that you can do exactly the same things, but saying that it's not all easy, that it would be lovely to think that all the fights that we'd had meant that various things were won and they stay won for all time. But if there's nothing else that I say, it's that struggles are always recursive, that they never stay still, that one has to continually think about the new ways in which some of the same issues recur. Okay? As well as, quite rightly, not resting on one's laurels, but appreciating when things have changed, when they are better, when more and more people recognise that one's not mad for saying that one would fragment feminism. I mean, I was one of the founding members of the Manchester Rape Crisis Collective, and one of the things that people would frequently say to me is, yes, but don't you think that feminism is more important than race? Don't you think that that's the fundamental thing? And I would say, no. That's precisely why one needs an approach that sees it as sort of multiple and not as essentializing gender and so on. Fewer people do that now, but there clearly are some who feel that the issue is feminism. And I was searching through today the Everyday Racism site on website, because obviously that's important, but I really couldn't find things on racism. I didn't have terribly much time, but I thought did I say everyday racism? Yeah. I meant everyday sexism. Sorry. Everyday racism is such a collocation that I said it. I couldn't find anything. Some of you may have had more success, but I was very surprised, particularly since I thought everyday sexism probably does take something. Not necessarily, they may never have heard of Everyday Racism, the book by Philomena Essed, but it did seem a bit intertextual. And so I was very surprised that within everyday sexism, nothing happens that is, sort of around racialization. And anyway, it just surprised me a bit. Maybe I need to look harder, or you can tell me later. Okay. And these are things that I don't have time to discuss. But I wanted to cite a blog from Sara Ahmed, and the reason that I do is because one of the points that I want to make quite strongly is that we need to fight it or lose it. Things that are apparently gained are very easily lost. And I think that that's terribly important. And Sara, in this blog, published earlier this year, says, I've used the term critical sexism to describe the kind of sexism reproduced by institutions that think of themselves as being critical and thus not implicated in sexism. And she goes on, I'll skip out of it because of the time, there is fantasy of feminist digestion, as if feminism has already been taken in and assimilated into a body and is thus no longer required. The fantasy of feminist digestion is a little bit like diversity, a fantasy fold. And she points out how she's just been struck by how many courses are organised again in ways that look as if nothing has intervened to change them from being simply white, male, European genealogies. And therefore to think about academia and that everyday academic practices very much can set up not politics of belonging, but politics of unbelonging for people who are minoritized, racialized as other within the academy. And just again, Sara, because I think she says it well, about bodies being out of place, and I won't read that, but also this is a German black woman talking about academia not being a neutral location, a white space where black people have been denied the privilege to speak. As a scholar, I'm commonly told that my work on everyday racism is very interesting, but not really scientific. A remark which illustrates this colonial hierarchy in which black scholars reside. And that's rather colloquial. Okay. And then I think that there are issues for intersectionality, and in a very interesting paper, Gail Lewis talks about the way in which, once again, there are some people using intersectionality in a way that binarizes theory and bodies and experience in such a way that black women, again, in some settings, some writing, are refused exactly the right to do theory that was won in the 1980s, we thought, or that should have been won in the 1980s, that we continue to have to fight for. And Barbara Tomlinson, also in, actually in a few papers, talks about the way in which, what she's actually talking about is the way in which Kimberlé Crenshaw's versions of intersectionality have been received and treated. And she argues that the academic project makes a rhetorics of replacement and rejection really quite key. That what one frequently does in academic work is say, okay, Kimberlé Crenshaw may have coined this term, but look at what she says, it's rubbish. Okay, if we're going to do intersectionality, it has to be done like this. And we've got the way forward. Okay? So she, as a white woman, is arguing that this won't do. You know, what I would say from this, I mean, and I like the way in which she uses Albert Memmi's notion of scene of argument, that the scene of argument is crucial to understanding how arguments are, how academic work is received, what it does, and so on and so forth. Now, otherwise, the context is crucial. So from that, I would say that a commitment to dialogue and to thinking about the psychosocial are both really crucially important, thinking about intersectionality into the future. And I wanted to end, this is my penultimate PowerPoint, I would have liked to have the song, Ella's song, playing here. One reason that I wanted, which is by Sweet Honey in the Rock, and one reason that I would have liked to is because it keeps playing in my mind since all these killings of black men in the United States by police officers and what happens with them. And Angela Davis is talking about it last week and on Women's Hour as well. So I did write to their manager asking whether I could play it here, but I didn't get a reply, so I'm not playing it. But here, duly acknowledging copyright, it's written by Bernice Johnson Reagan, and it's Song Talk Publishing Company. And if I were to sing it to you, I wouldn't be stoned because you're too polite, but it might not be very pleasant. So I'll just pick out a few. If you can sing, please, come to the mic, please.
Until the killing of black men, black mothers' sons, is as important as the killing of white men, white mothers' sons. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. And that which touches me most is that I had a chance to work with people, passing on to others that which was passed on to me. I'm not gonna
So the refrain, or?
Yeah, we who believe, I can't do it if I don't do the refrain because I can't keep the tune in my head. We who believe in free. Oh, yeah, come on.
This is barbarous.
But if other people sing as well,
I was going to say, I know there are people out there who know this song.
Okay.
Everybody sings.
And now we've got past that first verse.
Yes, so we're going to start with the refrain, which is the bit that everybody can join in. Yay! Right, 1, 2, 3, 4.
We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. To me, young people come first. They have the courage where we fail. And if I can shed some light as they carry us through the gale. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. That's so lame. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. The older I get, the better I know that the secret of my going on is when the reins are in the hand of the young who dare to run against the storm. We who believe in freedom freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Not needing to clutch for power, not needing to light, just to shine on me. I need to be just one in the number as we stand against tyranny. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Struggling myself don't mean a whole lot. I come to realize that the teaching others to stand up and fight is the only way my struggle survives. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. I'm a woman who speaks in a voice and must be heard. At times I can be quite difficult. I'll bow to no man's word. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes.
Unexpected and fantastic. Just to end, I think that the intergenerational, I mean, one of the reasons it's playing in my mind, it just, because I do believe that first verse so much, that actually until the killing of black men, black mothers' sons, is as important as the killing of white men, white mothers' sons. Anybody's child, anybody's brother, whatever, is really important. And until they're equal, that's a real problem. And it's not because I have a son myself, I don't, but I just think that we can't go on this way in the States or here. But I wanted to say something to finish about intergenerational activism. And simply by putting those two pictures of Angela Davis, one of the things that I'm saying is that, people talk about either the young being apathetic and therefore, the old having to do it, or old people not doing anything. But actually, one needs to be active throughout life. And this is what Angela's saying. This is an interview that she did last week for East London Lines, and they're asking about the intergenerational. And she's saying, in many ways, this has to be decided by young people themselves. It's not for one generation to dictate to another generation as to the best mode of political activism. Every generation talks about apathy. When I was young, we talked about how apathetic everyone was, and this was during the 60s. But we talked about how difficult it was to persuade people to get involved, and oftentimes the charge of apathy absolves us of the responsibility of doing the work that brings people into political movements. It never happens naturally. It never happens as a matter of course. It's always as a result of serious and very hard work. I always like to emphasize the work of the organizer, work that usually doesn't get acknowledged, work that's usually not seen. There's probably more hope in the younger generation now than at any time that I can remember in my lifetime. Thank you.
You leave your home for days and days, and I know, I said I know